Emily was a young nurse working endless shifts just to survive. Between her student loans, her mother's medical bills, and the constant exhaustion, she often wondered if kindness was worth anything in a world that seemed so cruel. Yet, despite her struggles, she always cared for her patients with genuine warmth. One winter night, she was assigned to a private ward where an older man named Richard lay battling a terminal illness. He was quiet, dignified, but Emily noticed the loneliness in his eyes. Unlike most patients, he rarely had visitors. She would often sit by his side after her rounds, speaking to him softly, reading him books, or simply holding his hand when the pain grew unbearable. One evening, Richard looked at her with trembling eyes. "Emily," he said, "I don't have long left, but I need a companion, not out of love, but trust. Would you marry me?" Emily froze. Marriage? To a man she barely knew? But then she saw his frailty, his quiet plea for dignity, and her heart softened. He promised her financial stability for her family, though Emily did not care about money. What mattered was giving him comfort in his last days. After a long pause, she whispered, "Yes." What Emily didn't know was that Richard wasn't just a dying widower. He was the silent billionaire owner of the very hospital she worked in, and her life was about to change forever. The wedding was small and quiet. No guests, no grand celebrations. Just vows whispered in a hospital chapel. Emily stood in a borrowed white dress, Richard in a suit that hung loose on his frail frame. Their union wasn't born of romance but of compassion, a promise to give a lonely man dignity in his final days. At first, Emily treated it as an act of duty. She cooked for him, sat with him during long nights, and reminded him he wasn't alone. But soon something shifted. Richard began to smile more, even laugh softly at her stories. Emily found herself drawn to his wisdom, the way he spoke about life, regrets, and the things money could never buy. One evening, as they sat near the hospital window watching the snowfall, Richard whispered, "You've given me more joy in these weeks than I've felt in years." Emily's chest tightened. She hadn't expected her heart to care this deeply. Yet there was a mystery about him. His hospital bills were never discussed. His private room far too luxurious for an ordinary man. Emily assumed he had saved enough in his life, never imagining the truth. Then, one day, she overheard two doctors whispering, "The owner himself married a nurse?" Emily's breath caught. Owner? Her husband wasn't just Richard, the patient. He was Richard Hayes, the billionaire who built the very hospital she worked in. And she had married him without knowing. Emily's world turned upside down. The man she had married for compassion wasn't just a lonely patient. He was one of the wealthiest men in the country. She confronted him gently one night. "Richard, why didn't you tell me who you really are?" He smiled faintly, his eyes weary but kind. "Because I wanted to be seen as a man, not a billionaire. You gave me kindness without expecting anything. That's rarer than all the wealth I own." Emily sat in silence, overwhelmed. She had never been drawn to money, but knowing he had hidden so much from her left her torn. Yet as days passed, she realized it didn't matter. Richard's laughter when she teased him, his gratitude when she held his hand during his weakest moments, that was what mattered. The nurses began whispering behind her back, some envious, others curious. But Emily kept her head high. She hadn't married Richard for wealth. She had married him because he needed her, and now, strangely, she needed him too. One night, during a storm, Richard's condition worsened. Machines beeped frantically, doctors rushed in, and Emily felt her heart shatter. She clung to his hand, tears streaming down her face. "Stay, Emily," Richard gasped. "Even if I go, promise me you'll live, not just survive." Emily sobbed, whispering, "I promise." At that moment, she realized she wasn't just a caretaker. She was his wife in every sense, bound by love, not just duty. Richard's health continued to decline, and Emily prepared herself for the inevitable. She spent every moment she could by his side, cherishing each laugh, each story, each fragile breath. Yet, she never once asked him about money or his empire. For Emily, this marriage had become something deeper, about love, sacrifice, and dignity. One morning, Richard asked for the hospital lawyer. Emily was puzzled. Hours later, he pressed a sealed envelope into her hands. "This is my will," he whispered. "When I'm gone, you'll understand." Tears burned her eyes. "Richard, I don't want your money." "I know," he smiled faintly. "That's why I trust you with it." The following week, Richard passed away peacefully in her arms. The hospital mourned its silent owner, but Emily mourned the man who had taught her what love truly meant. When the lawyer finally read the will, Emily sat in stunned silence. Richard had left her everything. Not just his fortune, but the hospital itself. Gasps filled the room, but Emily barely heard them. Her heart ached for the man she lost, not the billions he left behind. Instead of living lavishly, she chose to honor him. Emily poured her new resources into the hospital, funding free treatments for the poor, improving conditions for overworked nurses, and creating scholarships for medical students who, like her, came from nothing. Through her, Richard's legacy became more than wealth. It became kindness extended to thousands. Years passed, but Emily never forgot the winter she became a wife out of compassion. The world now knew her as the young nurse who inherited a billionaire's empire, but she knew herself as something much simpler, a woman who had once chosen kindness over fear. The hospital thrived under her leadership. Walls that once echoed with despair now carried hope. Children received care their families could never afford. Struggling nurses found support, just as Emily once longed for. And every Christmas, Emily lit a candle in the chapel where she and Richard had exchanged vows, whispering, "We did it, Richard." Together, her story spread far beyond the hospital, touching lives in places she'd never been. People were inspired not by her sudden wealth, but by the way she used it. She became a symbol of how compassion, even in the darkest hours, could change the world. And yet, Emily remained humble. She still walked the hospital halls in her scrubs, greeting patients, comforting the lonely, and reminding everyone that kindness was priceless. One evening, as she looked out the same hospital window where Richard once sat beside her, she smiled through her tears. He had entered her life as a dying widower and left it as the love who gave her purpose. Her life had begun with struggle, but through love and humanity, she carried forward a legacy far greater than riches. One built on compassion, healing, and hope.